Welcome, everyone. Tom Driscoll here from EdTechTeacher. We have another great session where we get to speak with one of our presenters at the upcoming Innovation Connection Conference. Today, I'm joined by Jed Stefanowicz. He is the digital learning coach in the Walpole School District. I'm going to turn it over to him in a second, but first, just want to thank you for hopping on the call and also for being part of our event coming up soon.
My pleasure. I can't wait to get back in person at a conference, and I love any EdTechTeacher conference.
Excellent. Thanks. I mean, just the ability to be back in a space with educators and colleagues and friends that we know is just something I'm really looking forward to.
So Jed, nothing replaces face-to-face eye contact and the mojo of the exchange of ideas in person.
Right. And I was talking with Kyle Wilson. He's another one of our presenters and a good friend of mine. And I don't know if it's like this with you, but a lot of times it's not just the sessions you attend, but it's those conversations between sessions. It's getting the coffee.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And that's where I think a lot of the learning happens, and it's a lot of fun. So I'm going to turn over to you. So maybe give us a little background and how you got into education, what your role's been over the past couple of years, and maybe some interests that you have in the education space.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. And thanks again for having me at the conference and having me today. So I was a third grade teacher for 20 years in Natick, and I was using a lot of technology and began to become one of those classrooms that was using and modeling a lot of technology use. So I kind of shifted into building a role of a digital learning coach in Natick. It was initially a teacher on special assignment, which moved into this role of a digital learning coach, which really is a mixture of job embedded PD and then a lot of just the regular tech support that I've historically offered. So now I'm in Walpole. This is my third year in Walpole as a digital learning coach, and where I was the one DLC in Natick, I'm now part of a team, which is huge. It makes a really big difference. So I'm at Old Post Road Elementary, and there's a digital learning coach at each of the 4 elementaries. So it's great. I'm part of a building, part of a staff again, and still have the classroom activities, classroom experience, and I'm in the classrooms every single day. So all the pieces I was afraid of missing from teaching, I'm getting those every day. And then getting the piece of the PD and the mentorship and the co-teaching, that's great. And that's really what this job's all about.
Yeah, and I think that setup that you have there, districts that can figure that out, I mean, that tends to be the best model, I think. The fact that you can have a team of folks that are in your position so you can collaborate, but then you're also in the classrooms, like helping with lessons, working with teachers, and I think that's just a fantastic approach. So
well, it's really difficult. I mean, every district has similar positions. Of course, they're all called different things, and in some districts it's a technology integration specialist, where it's more of a specialist model where it's tech time. Others use a coaching model, and it really does take a really long amount of time. And if there happens to be a pandemic, that kind of throws everything all out of whack, because historically, people who may not be lunging to get first in line to meet with you or work with you suddenly have to. And one of the best things I heard at the beginning of the pandemic was, we're all in the same boat. Well, what I'd heard, I think I saw it on Twitter, was not that we're all in the same boat, that we were all in the same storm. Meaning that we're all in different boats, different points of readiness, different points of interest, different skill sets. And suddenly we were thrust into this moment of having to rely on technology, use technology. And it was a really interesting dynamic to see really veteran teachers who could lean on the teaching they knew how to do well and find ways to do that. They find units they had done for 10, 15, 20 years. So it wasn't a journey of having to figure out what are we going to be teaching now. They knew what they needed to teach. It was really about the connected piece.
Yeah, and I don't know if you saw this with some of those veteran teachers though, but like a lot of them just have really sound, good teaching practices. So to see them try to apply technology for, like, in some cases for the first time, I found, like, just in my experience I was a digital learning coach for about 6 years in the Bristol Warren district. And I found like some of the most powerful experiences were getting those veteran teachers that were really good at their craft and then having them start to experiment with that. And that was the aha moment for entire departments, right? Because they look up to those teachers, they look up to those leaders, and to see them innovating is really powerful.
Yes, that's the sweet spot. And that's really what my role when it works best is that initial idea where someone might say, oh, I'm a dinosaur. I'm a tech, I'm a tech novice or I'm tech
Mhm.
phobic or whatever. I think that's an unfair knock. And I also think it's an unfair knock on new teachers who are digital natives, right?
Right.
To be expected to know how to teach well because they don't have the 20 years of experience. They haven't done that unit for 20 years. So you have novice teachers um, with highly experienced teachers. It's that connection. And that's kind of what my whole crusade has been is, especially if you have people on the same grade level team, for example, who someone's brand new and sure, they may become comfortable with the operability of technology, but you suddenly thrust into COVID and then you really lean on that experienced teacher, a veteran teacher who um, knows what needs to get done. And sure, it throws everyone for a loop for different reasons. But it's hard to articulate, but I think you get my point is that there's an unfair expectation on new teachers to be highly skilled and experienced teachers because they haven't had the experience, just as there's an unfair knock on veteran teachers because they haven't had necessarily the nature of everyday technology use that younger teachers have. So that pairing, I think, is a really cool opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly with that. And one thing, it took me a while to recognize and understand this, but sometimes a veteran teacher that's, they've been through a lot of these ups and downs and these cycles of change and
The
they
pendulum,
have,
you mean? The pendulum we talked about?
the pendulum. And they have a healthy skepticism of some of the new ed tech approach. And at first, especially when I was first like super enthusiastic and an evangelist for all of this stuff, I would kind of see that as like a roadblock. But as I worked more in this, I'm like, you know what? Like sometimes we need a really healthy skepticism of some of these new things. Like we need to look at it with a critical eye because just because it's a new innovative approach and it's using ed tech doesn't necessarily mean it's going to make things better. So
That's interesting. Yeah. And I think actually COVID brought some of that to life because nobody had an inch of brain space or cognitive ability to do anything for the sake of doing it. It was all about, is this about student learning? Is this really, enhancing or even enabling connection and teaching and learning? And that healthy skepticism, you're right, it can feel like a roadblock. It can feel like pushback. But at the end of the day, it's really about, is it about student learning? And I think a big piece of the role of a digital learning coach or any tech integration person is to always keep that focus on practice over product. And if I'm bringing, a robot into a classroom, is it about the robot? Is it about the learning that's going on with the robot? So the more content and real and authentic the experience can be for students, you don't have to convince anyone. There doesn't have to be buy-in.
Excellent. Yeah, let's use that as a nice segue to some of the things that you're going to be talking about at the conference. So I'll hop on a screen share here. I actually see some of your robots behind you there, so that's something that we'll discuss. But yeah, so this is the homepage for our event coming up. And let me just kind of pop down to Jed's session. So Jed's one of our featured speakers at the session. So let me pop to here it is. Yep. So the 5th C, computational thinking in K-5. So, Jed, maybe just unpack that a little bit for us. What are some of the things that you're passionate about and that you're working with teachers in your school and that you'll be sharing in that session?
Sure. So we're now 20 plus years into 21st century learning, right? And we forever have been talking about those 4 C's: communication, collaboration, critical thinking, creativity. So my suggestion is that there is a 5th C, and that's computational thinking. And that's what brings all those other C's kind of to life and transferred in application in classrooms. I also contend that besides those, the 4 C's of learning, is that there are also these other 4 C's, which are compassion, connection, culture, and climate. And it's when those intersect, that's where you begin to build agency and empowerment in students. So on top of whether it's the student 4 C's, the building culture 4 C's, or now what I contend is a 5th C, computational thinking, that's really about giving kids opportunities, creating moments to put all those pieces into play. And it doesn't have to be electronic, right? So if we're talking about computational thinking in 3rd grade language or in 5th grade or in 1st grade language. It doesn't always have to be thinking like a computer. That's the easiest thing to look at, but it's really about sequencing, decomposition, breaking down complicated steps into more manageable steps. So a great, early activity I do is, and this is a code.org classic, is I don't know if it's called My Robotic Friend or My Robotic Arm, but it's literally just taking cups and going into a classroom. And I've done this across, lower than you might expect and higher than you might expect. And it's always awesome. I kind of mentioned to the teacher within earshot of students, is it okay if I bring my 6-foot robot in the class? And of course, I'm the 6-foot robot. And I might be spilling the beans on my intro to our workshop here. But I start with this book, How to Code a Sandcastle, which is about this girl who brings her robot to the beach. And then you have to learn that, specificity matters. And you have to give commands and program something to do something. So I come in and I take these cups and I just ask, can you give me instructions to build a 3-cup pyramid, which seems very simple. I can do it in a second and a half. But suddenly, I turn on my arm and I'm the robot. And kids have to figure out a language to command me to build this 3-cup. And then they can design their own. And, just like anything else, you spiral it up and kids can take it all over the place. But the whole idea that just immediately you hit a roadblock, you hit kind of that hurdle of, you need to tell my arm to go forward and don't forget to tell it to go back. And then I can only do what you tell me to do. I'm just a robot after all. It's what I do, but it makes it really dynamic. It makes it really interesting, but it really does illustrate for students that it's all about finding a language and breaking down finding patterns, breaking it down, then applying it and extending it beyond. So all those hallmarks of what computational thinking are really all about are put into practice. And then you watch these groups of kids and you kind of eavesdrop on their conversations. And that's when you hear the collaboration, the communication, critical thinking, and the creativity of I even tell them there doesn't have to be exact symbols. If they have something they come up with, I want you to help come up with a language. You come up with a command. The hardest part, honestly, and that's the case with a lot of the stuff, is not getting in kids' way. Letting them struggle, not doing their work for them, which is really hard for a seasoned teacher, for a new teacher. But all this stuff is, it's tricky. It's tricky for everyone at every age. And if you've ever done a code.org activity, you know that, within 10 minutes, sometimes kids are surpassing your comfort zone because there's so many levels and everything. You don't honestly know how to answer every question they're going to come up with. So a little bit of that productive struggle comes into play, and not doing their thinking for them is really a hallmark of all these activities. And then we move up to, depending on the grade level, beginning to introduce robots. So like a Bebot, which is, it kind of does one thing, but it does it really well, which is that idea of you tell it what to do and it does it. And then, those same skills spiral up to Dash or Ozobots, which are, I'm going to be bringing all these to the conference. So kind of one of the things I want to do in the session is to have a real hands-on playground to have teachers explore. Ozobots are awesome, and they've really come a long way in terms of what they can do and how they connect and what students can do with them.
Are those the ones that you draw and they follow the patterns that you draw?
Yeah, yes. And I kind of break down that skill between younger grades and older grades. But yeah, they have a color sensor underneath. So you literally can have a red stripe, and yes, it'll be red. And then if it hits a little blue, black, blue, for example, it'll spin or slow down. So you actually, you're taking a magic marker and you're giving commands to this robot. So they're programming it again. And I try to bounce back between plugged in and unplugged. We'll build binary bands. I wouldn't call them bracelets, of course, but binary bands just to reinforce that idea of language, or flashlights. And then here, maybe a little Morse code. But just that idea that this isn't brand new. There might be brand new tools, but the practice in place of having kids design secret languages. And then, what's great about a lot of these tools, two things that are great about them. One is that there are now, and I think COVID brought a lot of this about, there are simulators on their web pages. So Ozobot or Circuit Playground, for example, when you code it, And with elementary, we're mainly block coding. So we're just dragging over, at the start, do this, then do this, then do this. And it looks like Scratch or any other block-based program. But a lot of these have simulators. So if you don't have the robot in your space, if you don't have the physical thing, you can run it right on your screen. So if students are introduced to this, and that's a great equity point too, because all this needs to be equitable, needs to be accessible for opportunity, but then also just for have engagement. Having the simulator right there on screen, you can run the program. Now, that being said, nothing beats having something zip around the classroom. And if you can drag 6 commands to have your dash go, make a square, you can use that same thinking and have a drone fly around the classroom.
Right.
And it's literally you're dragging blocks, you're giving instructions, but like we talked about before, it's got to be about the practice, not the product. So what are we doing with all these things? It's not about just learning how to fly a drone. It's not about learning how to make your robot dance. It's about what's the teamwork going on? What's the problem that is being accomplished? What is the task that students are challenged to do? And then any curriculum piece is great. Scratch Junior is a really great entry point for so many students. And if Scratch Junior can be used to, let's say, pick a page of your favorite fairy tale, illustrate a scene, any curriculum content. I've seen some that are more of a stretch than others, but it doesn't take more than a minute to watch when you're having kids take off from this desk, fly around the trash can and land over there, to see all of those skills that are coming in place to make that goal happen. So like I said, it's having the digital component on screen to run it is really effective and fair and equitable. But if you have the ability to get even one, or even a couple of these things in your building that are shared and managed, nothing beats the excitement of having these things zip around on desks and floors.
Right. And I like too how you had a nice mix of, there were some computer programs, but it's also some tactile things, right? Some offline activities. And I think that balance is really helpful, especially for some teachers that understandably, like, they might be worried about, the amount of time kids are using the computers and the limitations of not having tactile experiences. But it seems like you hit on all of those. Like, you kind of have a good balance there. Do you find that helps
COVID
with the buy-in?
It does. And honestly, the pandemic helped with by creating the need, honestly.
Right.
I had a space before COVID called the I space in our building, which was kind of set up like a Discovery Museum kind of engaging spot where classes came to. Then I had to go on the road, and it's staying that way for the foreseeable future. But what that meant was I had to make a place for kids to go to virtually. So the iSpace to Go page that I made, that's where students can go to, and it's all web-based at that point. It's either code.org activities or just, believe me, I've spent so much time kind of going through and curating things that either aren't tacky, pushing for a subscription, don't charge, they're safe, or either anonymous or data privacy approved within our districts. But places where students can go, and it can be really self-directed, which really, I think, helps with some of the buy-in that you were talking about, because then the teacher becomes the facilitator or even the co-learner sometimes, where the students could say, oh, here's how I programmed a dance party, or I had to move this log so that the beaver could complete his wall and do this. You begin to see, oh, there's a real repetition of skills here, and I can see what the spiral is, and I can see what the trajectory of learning is when, all of a sudden by the 4th level, we're introducing the idea of a loop, and these come in, whatever the product or the company or the organization is. And as always, some of the best ones are free and available. It just takes time to really find them. And then using resources like Common Sense Education, for example, or even code.org to kind of filter through all the offerings, because there's a ton. And then finding ones that are going to work for your building, district, or state, or even in your classroom. And then just sometimes less can be more. So you don't have 50 places for kids to go to, but you have kind of 8 trusted activities, and you understand what the learning objectives are, and you understand where kids are starting and where they're going to, I think can be really helpful.
Excellent. Yeah, and I think folks hearing from someone like you that's an expert in the field, that's done a lot of this research, I think that's valuable, right? Because then you can kind of point people towards the ones that are vetted, they are helpful in the classroom. Because I think that's one of the things that, teachers just get overwhelmed. It's like paralysis of choice. There's so many ways that you can do computer science in the classroom now. So I think your ability to kind of sift through that and provide some good recommendations is really helpful for a lot of folks.
It's funny, sometimes to get that credibility, experience can count as much as research, and
Right.
experience becomes the research where
Right.
I know exactly what it's like to be 3 levels into something with your class, and suddenly they're asked to subscribe, or your free trial ends, or all
Yeah.
those things that'll burn you, that are really real and authentic for classroom teachers. And having that
Mhm.
connection still has really been critical to make it all work. Um,
Mhm.
so bringing computer science to life in the classroom, I try to find these activities that are aligned both with ISTE standards and then the mass DLCS frameworks, and kind of blend all those together, um, so that students are hitting those standards. Of course, from kindergarten to 5, it's going to look different, sound different,
Mhm.
but really have, as ISTE would have it, be the focus on students becoming digital learners, not about what they're
Mhm.
doing, but who are they becoming. And I think that's a really interesting piece. And I like how the mass frameworks kind of focus on the practices. So it's not this scope and skill of operability of machines and devices. It's really about what are the practices that they're doing. Then I think there's a more natural connection to content, to curriculum, to classroom activities. It's no longer just isolated tech time.
Got it. No, that makes a ton of sense. All right, so I guess I'll get you out of here on the last question here is, you know, um, if you were working with, say, a relatively new teacher or even a seasoned teacher that hasn't engaged with any of these, I guess, topics before, so other than going to see your session, like what would be another kind of like entry point? Like where would you suggest folks start to learn more about this, or um, any advice for those teachers that are interested but just don't know where to begin?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned, whether it's a brand new teacher or a veteran teacher. My first thing would be to connect with each other,
Right.
because I don't think a lot of the strength is going to come from necessarily a vendor or a conference or a workshop. It's going to come from the teamwork. It's going to come from that connection. Then you find a conference, and then you go to and there's so many great free available, either webinars, conferences. Code.org offers a lot.
Mhm.
EdTechTeacher, of course, is really high caliber. And then you go to those together, and that's a really great piece, because then you leave a conference, it's the someday versus Monday thing. You leave a conference wanting to try something the next day in your classroom. And that's one of the things about my session that I want to have people do. Yeah, if you're going to order some Dash robots, you're going to spend some dough. If you're ordering drones, you're going to want to fly them around and be comfortable with them. You have to be a little bit uncomfortable, I think, knowing what you don't know. Um, but as George Couros, I always quote him, because he would say, never hold students back based on what you don't know. And that's like a real punch in the gut.
Mhm.
Yes, it's new and it's different, but it's new and it's different for everyone. And it's unfair not to explore an area because it's new to you. So my advice would be to partner up, pair up, find opportunities, and then talk to your friendly neighborhood digital learning coach. Find out, or
Mhm.
find whoever in your building. If it's someone on your team who you see, it doesn't have to be robots. It might just be someone who, wow, tell me about, I saw that really cool template you used in Google Slides. Show me how to bring that template into an activity I've done forever. It's those beginning steps and beginning conversations that get people way more comfortable
Mhm.
collaborating, because those 4 C's, or now 5 C's, it's not just for students. It's not just kid stuff anymore. It's, if we can get our teachers, if we can get staff and faculty working to collaborate, to communicate, and then
Mhm.
that's when you get that next tier of the critical thinking, where they are problem solving together, and someone isn't embarrassed to say, whoops, I wasn't looking for 5 minutes and Edpuzzle came through, or
Mhm.
whoops, I wasn't paying attention and I didn't learn Screencastify. Suddenly there's a comfort in saying, show me how you did that. And that's a really huge piece. I mean, that's kind of what my role is all about, but it happens pretty innately across all buildings. You just have to find where it's happening and open yourself up to asking sometimes for that quick entry point, as you said.
Got it. Excellent. Well put. All right. So I'm definitely looking forward to your session at the conference. Looking forward to a lot of the sessions there. Looking forward to seeing you, hanging out a little bit, grabbing a cup of coffee.
Sounds great.
And yes, if folks did want to reach out to you, ask any questions, or to collaborate or to network, what's the best way for them to do that?
Email would be great.
Yep.
jstefanowicz at walpole.k12.ma.us. Or on Twitter at Stefanowicz135. Either of those would be great places. And I'd love to collaborate, love to share ideas, and love to see what other people are doing. Because honestly, that's how that's what gets me going too, is going and observing other teachers doing great practices, because that's how it's done best. There's the built-in buy-in and credibility of seeing it in practice. So I love to learn as much as I love to share what I'm learning.
Awesome. Yep. And I'll make sure to put that contact information in the show notes, in the YouTube underneath our video here. So, all right. Well, thanks again, Jed. Thanks for taking some time out of your, I'm sure, very busy day over in Walpole, and looking forward to seeing you at the conference.
Thanks, Tom. I appreciate it.
All right. Take care.